There's so much talk recently about showing up with our whole selves. This is true for personal relationships and increasingly within the workplace. But what about in the healthcare sphere? Are patients using social media to take a whole person view of their emotional and functional needs? That's what we're going to talk about today in this episode of the PRovoke Media podcast. I'm Arthi Shah, executive editor at PRovoke Media and host for today's episode, which is also part two in a series that we are doing in partnership with MMC about influencers in the healthcare space. So part one, which I'll link to in the show notes, explores some eye-opening findings from MMC's Influencers in Healthcare survey. But on today's episode, we are going to talk directly with an influencer. So we have on today's episode, Shanda Foster, who actually, I should correct, does not identify as a healthcare influencer, but rather a generalist who shared her health journey, which we'll get into in just a moment. And we'll have a link to this as well, but her Instagram is Shanda Sound Off for those of you who want to go visit that. We also have Christina Austria, who is an SVP at MMC on today's show. Welcome, Shanda and Christine.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yes, well, I'm really excited. And Shanda, this, I teased this in the beginning, but do you want to tell your story about sort of, how did you intend to become an influencer, and what was that journey like? And then tell me how that intersected with your story about your health.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I actually was not looking to be an influencer. I guess it was about around the time that the influencer kind of got this strange tag attached to it, where it was like, attention seeking, all of these things that were, just not me. And I had, just to go rewind, I was diagnosed with stage 3 endometrial cancer in 2012. And people kept telling me that I should tell my story, but I was kind of like, it's a little personal. I don't know if that's, something that I'm looking to do right now. But I will say around 2018, 2017, 18, I just started to notice that there weren't that many people that looked like me or identified, as I did, that were in the same space. And so I just felt like I really needed to share my story and just talk about some of the things that I, had dealt with, and some of the things that I'm still dealing with, in terms of an illness or healing from that. And so I took to my Instagram and I kind of used that as sort of like my unofficial blog to be able to kind of just, I don't like to use the word like overshare, but just to kind of talk about some things. And it seemed to really resonate with a lot of people that were following me, or people who I just felt like people were searching for something. So, you go through the hashtags and you're looking for things that, I don't know, like you're looking for like red sweaters. So you go to the hashtags and you're looking for red sweaters. Well, people were looking for endometrial care or endometrial cancer or cancer survivors, things like that. And then somehow they landed on my page. And so I started to get more followers that way, and people who were actually engaging with me. And through that is actually how I was introduced to MMC. Someone found me there, and we kind of got into talks about, opportunities of sharing my story on a larger scale. And that's kind of what brought me here.
Wow. So, so you were diagnosed in 2012, and then so you really didn't take to the platform to tell your story until 2017, 2018. So there was definitely, so it wasn't sort of like you were live blogging the actual story.
Exactly. Well, I will also say too, during that time, I had quite a few recurrences. I will say like, maybe like 3 recurrences. And so I was diagnosed with stage 3 endometrial cancer, but in 2012, but in 2013, I was diagnosed with colon cancer as well, like the beginning stages of it. And so I'm happy to say that I'm in remission now. But that's quite a lot to try to process during that time. And I think it did take that time in order for me to kind of be able to speak about it. But around that 2017, 2018 time, it was kind of like, enough is enough. I think people need to really hear about this. And, this is just what I'm going to do, and it felt really good to be able to do that.
Right. And so, Kristine, I'll bring you in and sort of how your worlds collided in just a moment. But Shanda, I have just one more follow up, and that's, you reference, that, sort of finding that comfort zone in terms of what you want to share and when you want to share it. And I was wondering a little bit in terms of, obviously that's a personal decision that each person, makes for themselves. But how did you navigate, sort of putting yourself out there, but also probably protecting certain parts of your life as well and certain things that you were going through?
That's such a great question. I had a really great team, and team by team, I mean family, team Foster, around me. And, I talked to, some of my really close friends and family, and was like, I wanted to just start talking about this and kind of get the conversation going. What do I share and how much is too much to share? Because that's a big thing too. When oftentimes when people are dealing with traumas, sometimes we do this thing called trauma dumping. And I kind of talk about it in a video that I'm in the process of kind of working on, but that's a real thing. And so you want to be careful to not do that. And so I had some very close friends and family kind of putting in input and just kind of, saying, well, how about you touch on this? And what do you feel comfortable talking about? And I kind of had to take the time and weigh that before I even began. And even now, I think there are times where, I'll start to share something and I'll be like, maybe I can kind of hold back a little bit from that, and just, I think it's a day-to-day process if you are going to be in the influence space, just, on what exactly you want to share and how.
Right. So well said. And I like that, that, trauma dumping, right? Like that is real. And it's so nice to be aware of that. Kristine, just kind of bringing it to you. Do you want to talk a little bit more about sort of how MMC discovered Shanda and what that process was like?
Yeah, so we were working on a new initiative that was aimed at driving disease awareness of endometrial cancer. So we were finding that endometrial cancer was one of those other women's cancers that was on the rise, but not really being discussed. And what we also found was that it was also on the rise, particularly around the Black women. So we were looking at ways to educate this community and reach this community in an authentic way. Mind you, this was also during the time COVID first started. So, in-person events and things of that nature weren't really in the picture. So we were relying heavily on a digital first approach. So that's why we really looked to influencer voices to help spread the news about this new initiative, to help drive the dialogue that didn't exist for this specific cancer, and really leveraging those authentic voices. So when we were on the search for who would be appropriate and who would be the perfect fit for this, Shanda's name organically came up because you had an authentic tie, you had a personal story, you had people who were engaged in the conversation. And I know for you, it was a little bit, you were a little hesitant to tell your story, but those authentic stories is what drives other people to also share their stories. And I think that's the beauty of influencer marketing in the healthcare space is having those authentic stories and authentic voices to drive that conversation and encourage other people to also speak up and take action.
Can I ask you also, what was the engagement for both of you, in the middle of a, or, at the start, I guess, of a pandemic where, people, screening for cancers seemed to take the back burner, right? Especially in 2020, people were afraid to go into their doctor's offices. And I know there's been a push in 2021 to sort of remind people that, okay, please, come and do all your screenings now. But I'm just curious, what that was like to sort of get that story out in 2020 and what were some of the considerations that you had to navigate, asking people to screen themselves for this, knowing that, people were trying to avoid doctor's offices if they could.
Yeah, so it was really focused on having people aware of what the symptoms were, because I think there's this stigma and there's this bias that exists about below the belt issues that women just weren't talking about. no matter what age. So being aware of how some of these symptoms could be mistaken for other diseases, and just being aware of it and knowing your body, being in tune with your body, and raising the question to your doctor. So if it's not seeing your doctor in person, it's at least, maybe it's a telehealth visit, maybe it's a phone call to your doctor to at least get that conversation going and knowing when to speak up. Or if it's not talking to your doctor, it's talking to another woman in your life who, you think that you should be sharing this with, who could also provide an opinion to maybe encourage you to talk to your doctor about those symptoms.
Yes, the taboo on below the belt issues is very real. In fact, we did a conversation at PRovoke, I think it was a couple of months ago now, about women who were marketing in this space, you know, for women's health, whether it was technologies or pharmaceuticals, and how difficult it is because social media, not organically, but if you do a paid push on social media, they heavily censor what you can say, and you can't use the proper terminology for a lot of body parts. And so I wonder, did you guys run into that at all as part, like, did you guys have to use more euphemisms when talking about symptoms and talking about things, or did you feel like you actually, maybe given the nature of the content, that you didn't have to navigate around that?
I think based on the nature of the content, that wasn't an issue, but I'm curious, Shanda, if you had ran into that issue for any of your content for that.
You know, a lot of people were saying that there was so much censorship. I didn't experience any. In fact, I felt that I experienced a lot more, many more people came, even if it was like sliding in my DMs about just, you know, symptoms and those things. And I was really, you know, just listening to you talk, I was astounded by the amount of women who are just really the miseducation on what's going on with symptoms in our bodies. Because, you know, for example, a heavy period to them signified something that was normal. But to us, you know, in the healthcare space, we're that's alarming to us, you know, now that we know, now that we've all been informed, and now that we're, you know, in these different spaces and actually know what to look for. But in terms of that, I didn't feel any or didn't notice any, which is great.
Yeah, no, I think that is good. That is good. When we previously had this conversation, one of the speakers, she was CMO at a company where they do pleasure serum for women. And, you know, I mean, that's vagina and vulva and orgasm and things like that, you know, she was finding there were barriers to being able to use those words. I think period is okay. So it's on that note about content, Shanda, I'd love to hear about, like, so what content did you find that folks really resonated with? Like, what, you know, you talked about authenticity, and was there any narrative threads that you felt like were really powerful, or that sort of had an unexpected response from your audience?
I think the things that that resonated the most with people or got their attention were, you know, in the beginning, I was using actual photos of myself, you know, and you go to my Instagram and most of the, you know, everybody wants to look so glamorous and beautiful, and, you know, it's great. You see these people with like their makeup and their hair is done. And then, you know, you scroll and you see a picture of the same person that, you know, maybe was many years ago, and they're like a shell perhaps of what they look like, you know, or you're seeing just very real images. And I think people that knew me, that had heard about what my health issues, but weren't really around to experience it, and experienced it through those photos and those images, were really affected by that. And then also, you know, many other people, whether they had someone who'd gone through something like that, or, you know, was dealing with an illness, or they themselves were dealing with an illness. Those were the ones that really, I believe, really struck a chord with people. And also the wording that you're using, because I'm very forthcoming with everything that I've experienced. And, you know, I put that into words, and just reading that, you know, I felt like I wasn't getting people who would stop on the post or just kept scrolling. Like, they would stop and they would actually read it. And some of those, Kristine, you know, those posts weren't the shortest. So to get people who were actually really engaging and actually reading through was really it felt really, really amazing for that. And so I think that when we lead forth with these types of talks and talk about content, though, that's what we really need to lead with.
Yeah, I think it's great that you brought that up, because what we found too, specifically with your content, is that you really connect with your audience. Like, you're real, you don't sugarcoat things, and it feels like you're talking to a friend and that you value their advice. And I think that's the type of content that these communities are yearning for. They're yearning for someone like them, someone who has experienced it, someone who understands. So there's that level of empathy there, and there's that level of realness and rawness that you offer. So not having content overly staged or posed. And I think that's really important when it comes to healthcare influencer content, because that's the kind of people that are reading your content. That's the kind of people that you're trying to reach.
Kristine, I think that's such a great point. And I love that you use the word raw, because I think that's what we don't see. That when you think about it, an influencer on Instagram, right, that is what you think of as those overly staged photographs and images that, that that's not the full story, right? And so, Shanda, I think that's really, open and vulnerable to be able to put yourself out there in that way. Do you find that, there, for every time that you did that, like, did you feel like you needed to balance your page, or how were you trying to decide like what you wanted the overarching narrative to be? Were you saying, all right, this is just going to be raw, this is what we're going with right now? Or did you, or like, did you have a content strategy, I'm guessing, or an editorial sort of arc or vision that you had and that you were executing on? Or was it not that like, thought out, or was it more just sort of in the moment?
If I can be honest, I began, going into the influencer marketing space, wanting to have a vision. But then what I found, particularly with 2020, was sometimes I woke up and I just was like, I don't even want to post. I don't want to talk to anybody, and I think that it's really important for us to have those moments, because what I also found was it's very easy to become obsessed with what your page looks like. And I didn't want to be one of those people that, only posts the images that are, just constantly preaching to people and, constantly talking about illness, because I don't think that when you're dealing with an illness, that's realistic. No one wants to just be, have that conversation 24 hours a day. So I did think it was really important to balance it out with just who I am as a regular person, who is someone that's, I love comedy. I'm constantly laughing about things, and I'm just trying to enjoy life. And I think that is the message of my page. It's just how to enjoy life. We want to be realistic about it. We want to be able to, learn as much as we can, give advice, take advice, but we want to enjoy our lives, because people who are dealing with those illnesses, some of them don't have much of a choice but to do that. And so that's just kind of how I approached my page. It wasn't any, I'll say, the most planning that I use is in the actual caption, which would take some thought because I wanted it to be thoughtful. But other than that, it's just day by day.
I love, and to that point about authenticity. So I wanted to also ask you about what it was, what it's like to be a Black woman influencer. So in the beginning, it felt like the influencer space was really a certain profile of demographic. And I think that's evolved. So I'm curious to know both your experience as a Black woman influencer, and then as a Black woman influencer kind of focusing on the healthcare space. Can you share a little bit about what that's been like?
Sure. I started to really want to become more of like a lifestyle influencer. And this was prior to the healthcare side of it. This was actually kind of in conjunction because they kind of happened at the same time. So, I started doing more influencer work on the healthcare side, but then I was on Good Morning America. And then there were people that were, like, oh, would you want to partner to do this? And partnerships would pop up. And so I didn't see many people that looked like me. But what I also noticed is that people in the marketing space were more interested in the personality behind the influencer. And it was really interesting to go to, I'd go to like blogger events and influencer events and be the only one there. And now I'm starting to see more. the opportunity has started to open more. But I also realized that there's a method behind the madness. And so some of us in the diverse world don't necessarily know or understand the method to the madness. And so we really need to know that. That's like the one thing that kind of holds us back from being able to cultivate these relationships and partnerships. Now that I know more, I get offered more, and the more I put myself out there and I am more authentic and just kind of being my own self, not trying to be someone else I'm not, I find that that's attractive to brands and other companies that are looking for, faces.
Yeah, Kristine, did you want to chime in on just in terms of what you've observed in terms of how the diversity of the influencer space has evolved?
Yeah, I think from a healthcare standpoint, it definitely has evolved because in healthcare, it doesn't affect one specific type of community. Illnesses and diseases affect people of all walks of life. And in order to be relatable, you need to tap into those voices in those communities. So I have been seeing a lot more of diversity in the influencer space, diversity and inclusion, to make sure that we are capturing those voices that actually represent those people in those communities.
So I want to wrap up on a question about this relatability piece, and Shanda, you had mentioned partnerships, and there's obviously been some backlash to influencers, and that all the content's paid. How do you strike that balance between doing paid partnerships, and B, like making sure that they're authentic and that you are doing a service for your followers, and then also like in balancing that with that sort of earned content that people, frankly, sort of trust more, right?
Right.
I don't know if love to hear from both of you all in terms of like Shanda, how you do it on a day-to-day basis and with your own blog posts, and then Kristine, also sort of how you kind of balance that kind of from a higher level. Shanda, do you want to go?
I love that you brought up the things that, being able to have that trust with your followers and the people who are reading your content, because that's like the most important thing for me. Is I don't like to feel that I have to push something just because it's paid or something like that. So for me, I a lot of times, actually with everything, I always weigh it out. I like to find out about the company. I like to find out what their brand message is, who they are, as a brand before I even get involved. And then I just can't feel comfortable about using something, to push sales or something like that in telling other people to do it if I wouldn't do it myself. So it's really important. And I think the other fact is, influencers, that a lot of them, that's their job. So they've got to make money in some capacity. And I do see you just have to find a balance, whatever it is, whatever it means to you. But if it's something that's off brand for you, your followers are going to know and they're going to notice it.
Yeah, no, excellent. I mean, you're right, and you're right. It's a living for a lot of people, and so, and I think that reality set in. I think it took I think there was an adjustment period, but I think that has set in. Kristine, I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
It's the same thing on the other side, on the client side too. You need to make sure that you're finding someone who is essentially a spokesperson, someone who's speaking on behalf of your initiative that aligns with the same values and the same messaging and the same passion that the company has. So if all of those things don't align, then it's not a partnership. You know what I mean? So you really need to find and vet based off of what their interests are, what type of content they've been posting. Does that align with the company's values? Does that align with the company's messaging for that specific initiative? So it is making sure that it's balanced on both sides. So I think that's probably the most important thing when trying to identify the right influencer partnership that would work. And also because it is a partnership, yes, and we are in the pharma space, there are regulatory kind of restraints that we do need to work within. However, we also value and understand that the content we're pushing out on an influencer channel that's their asset, so we need to make sure that we are striking that balance between what we are able to say from a regulatory standpoint, as well as maintaining that authenticity that this influencer provides for us.
I think that I'm really glad that you brought up that regulatory piece, because that is crucial, especially when
Yeah.
so I know we need to wrap up, but I realized we didn't say where everybody is, and I think people can tell by my background. It's not real, but I am in the Bay Area. Shanda, where are you joining us from?
I am located in Boston, Mass.
Ah, nice. Okay, so East Coasters. And Kristine, where are you?
I'm based in Orlando, Florida.
Oh,
I
wow.
know that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we have a lot of geographies represented here today. And so thank you so much, Shanda and Kristine. This was so great. And Shanda, I'm so glad that you're doing well and you look great.
Thank you.
And I'd love to continue this conversation at some point. I think this is a really interesting and evolving space. So thank you, Shanda, and thank you, Kristine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you, Shanda, for everything that you've contributed for this initiative. It has really gone a long way for this community. So appreciate the work that you do, because it really is meaningful.
Thank you so much. I will have to say, MMC has been fantastic to work with. I've worked with a couple of other people, and just being able to be who you are and not feel like you have to change for a client has just been like next level for me as a content creator. And I'm sure for you also too, on the client side.
Well, that very, very nice shout out to MMC there. Well, and we will be back again soon with another episode of the PRovoke Media podcast, and of episode 3 of this 3-part series with MMC.